That's it.
Thank you. Good evening. It's good to see y'all back tonight for session 2 of the 4-session January 2021 Bible study. I had forgotten when I went into your restroom a few minutes ago that you have a little note there about washing your hands for 20 seconds. I have been forgetting to count on how long I've been washing my hands. And I think I heard this. I may be wrong now. Help me if I'm wrong. I'm sure somebody will correct me. But I think they claimed if you don't have a watch or anything, you don't know if you're washing your hands for 20 seconds, you can sing happy birthday twice, and that'll be 20 seconds. Well, I tried that tonight. It didn't work because I couldn't think of the second person to wish a happy birthday. I did the first one. But that's what happens when you only have a limited number of friends. I have so few friends, they won't even put my thing on Facebook, to remind you that so-and-so has a birthday. But I think I'm just sort of skirting Facebook jail. I'm sort of in the waiting room. I'm not actually behind bars yet. But anyway, it's good to see you tonight. We're on the Millennial Kingdom, and tonight, Lord willing, we'll do parts 1 and 2 of the outline, which is what probably should have happened last night, but we skipped to part 3, if you'll remember, if you were here last night. And if you were here last night, or if you were not, I understand we had 4 people watching on Facebook, so we're doing great. The momentum's building. And so we're up to 4 now that told me they were watching last night. Anyway, and I'm telling you, sitting over here in Brother Darrell's seat gives me a feeling of power. I felt like I was sitting in the King of England's chair or something. But then I realized that England doesn't have a king. They have a queen. But I enjoyed sitting there anyway. Nevertheless, if you were watching last night on national television by Facebook, or if you were here, we talked about why there must be a millennial kingdom. And that is 3 reasons that when man fell, God's form of government was lost. And does anybody remember what that form of government was called? A theocracy. Very good. And then Satan usurped authority over planet Earth and has been running the show ever since. And then the third thing is that there was a curse placed on nature, and in particular the animal kingdom. The animals that had been vegetarian and tame became carnivorous, meat eaters, and wild. So tonight we want to talk about how the millennial kingdom will start. It will last now for 1,000 years, and I can show you tonight from the scriptures on that. But I've asked our wonderful sound people here to go ahead and, if they will, to throw us up some verses that's actually on the outline. Remember, I made a big deal last night about you needed to bring a Bible. Well, you still need to, but you could probably get by tonight if we can look at the verses on the screen if you didn't bring a Bible. Now, if you've got one, there's nothing to beat your lap. Just to have a laptop, have your Bible sitting on your lap there and on top of your lap and read it there. But in case you didn't bring one, the screen is a good way to focus everybody's attention. These verses actually come from the outline, and Jonathan in his prayer was praying about the election tomorrow. I don't see how you can forget. Now, I can see how you would just say, I'm not going to vote, but I don't see how you can forget, because every time there's a commercial on television, it's one of them calling the other one a liar. And then if you go to the mailbox tomorrow, you'll be reminded as well, because you'll get your daily, whatever they call it, flyer from the post office. I know the post office doesn't send it out, but the candidates, but the post office has to deliver it. But anyway, tonight, and there is a lot riding on the election now. I'm serious. It's just sad that it's been so overdone that we're all so disgusted with it. But I'd like to see a lawyer every now and then, encouraging us to sue somebody after we've seen all the mudslinging. But nevertheless, it is an important election. But what will begin the millennial kingdom is the judgment of the sheep and the goats. And it's based on Matthew 25, which, if you're in context, is the last part of the Olivet Discourse, or the sermon on where Jesus spoke from the Mount of Olives, Matthew 24 and 25, and this is at the very end of it. In my Bible, all of these verses are in red letter, but I'm not, everybody doesn't have a red letter Bible, so depending on that. The judgment of the sheep and goats. Now, if you happen to have your outline in front of you, you might notice that there's a great white throne judgment under Roman numeral 5. It's easy to get these judgments confused, and some people have tried to blend them together as if they were just one. They're not. They're two separate judgments. And if you try to blend them together, you're going to have some major problems, and you're not going to be rightly dividing the word of truth. So, in a way, the judgment of the sheep and goats is the first judgment that starts the millennium, and then the judgment of the great white throne is at the end of it. So that's one major difference, is the timing. Another difference is the place. The judgment of the sheep and goats, we're not directly told in the Bible where it will take place, but I think I know, but I'm afraid to say it because I may be wrong. But on the other hand, who's going to remember anyway, right? I think it'll be in the valley of Jehoshaphat, which is right outside of Jerusalem, and that's based on a passage in Joel chapter 3. But I'm not dogmatic now. I'm just saying I believe that's going to happen, but I better check my watch out so I'll know when to quit. Okay, I'm already over time, and I hadn't even got started. But I'll stop around 6:30. I almost had a heart attack on that one, around 6:30. I'm sorry, it is 7:30, and we started at 6:30. See how confused I get? We are still at Mount Vernon, aren't we? Are we still on the air? Okay, our sponsors haven't withdrawn their support yet. But anyway, the Bible speaks of several different judgments. Now, I'm going to chase a rabbit here for a second, but I'll get back to the road in a minute. A lot of people have the idea that there's going to be a general judgment, that at the end of time, everybody's just going to be together, and it's sort of like at school, whether you pass or fail, the people that pass will be in one line, and the people that fail will be on the other side. And we'll find out then whether or not we're truly saved and if we can go to heaven or not. Folks, that isn't in the Bible at all. The Bible speaks of separate judgments for the saved and the lost. And the judgment's not to find out if you're saved anyway. You can find out tonight before you leave this building whether or not you're saved. Before you leave and get in your vehicle. In fact, I would encourage you not to even get in your vehicle tonight unless you know you're saved. But you can know that tonight and know it for sure. And the Bible teaches that you can have assurance of salvation. But the judgment is to find out the degree of punishment that people will have. And so there will be a judgment of the righteous that's found in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, also briefly mentioned in Romans chapter 14, and in in Romans chapter 5 and Romans chapter 14, and 2 Corinthians chapter 5 rather. So, and then there's a judgment here of the nations, or the sheep and the goats, and then there's the great white throne judgment, which is simply lost people. And then these are at least some of the major judgments. There may be some I'm leaving out, but there's not going to be a general judgment, although I have heard that term used at funerals before, but it is not accurate. Now, the judgment of the sheep and goats is also called the judgment of the nations. That's why in chapter 25, verse 32, Jesus says, "And before him shall be gathered all nations." So that is why we call it the judgment of the nations. Now, it is the people who will be at this judgment are folks who have survived the tribulation. Now, you know by now from your study in the past that tribulation will be 7 years. It will be a horrible time, but there will be people who survive the tribulation. And when Jesus comes, he will destroy many of his enemies, but he will not kill every person on earth. There will be people who will survive, who did not take the mark of the beast, and yet they survived the 7-year tribulation. These are the ones that we're talking about here in Matthew 25, the people who survived the tribulation. And the question on the floor is, who among these people will be allowed to enter into the millennial kingdom? And this is why Jesus divides them into sheep and goats. Now, when you first read this, it appears that their salvation is dependent on their works. It's amazing how misunderstood this passage has become. It's like I said last night, I believe there's a Murphy's Law that says if anything can be misinterpreted, it will. And there are people who have misinterpreted this to say that what the church needs to be doing is feeding the poor and giving food to the homeless and doing stuff like that to make the community better. And that is important, but the church's job is to win people to Jesus. If we can change the people and change their heart, and you can't do that, but the Holy Spirit does. It's not that we need to put a new suit on people, we need to put a new person in the suit. And the change needs to come from the inside out. But nevertheless, on the surface, if you just read this and didn't have anybody to help you understand it, you would think that their salvation or their entering into the millennial kingdom depended on their works. All right, I'm going to ask you a question. If we miss this one, we need to have a remedial Bible study next week. Does the Bible contradict itself? No, okay? So the Bible is very clear in other places that we are saved by grace and not by works. Ephesians 2:8-9 says, "For by grace are you saved through faith. It's a gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast." Lest anybody should go to heaven and feel like God owed it to them. Everyone that's saved is saved by grace. So the Bible would not teach that in some places and then turn over here and say, these people are going to enter the kingdom by works. That won't hold water. So there's obviously got to be an explanation here, because Jesus says, and I'm going to go ahead and read this, it's going to be a little lengthy, but then we'll come back and look at it, not verse by verse, but at least the highlights of it. "When the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. And before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was an hungered, and you gave me meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came unto me. Notice he doesn't say, I was hungry, and you had a fish fry for me. I hate to bring that up on a Monday night, but see, I can read and think at the same time. I know most of you think I can't, but I really can. It's just going slow. He says, Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered and fed thee, or thirsty and gave thee drink? When saw we thee a stranger and took thee in, or naked and clothed thee? Or when saw we thee sick or in prison and came unto thee? And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. Then shall he say to them on the left hand, Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was an hungered, and you gave me no meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you took me not in. Naked, and you clothed me not. Sick, and in prison, and you visited me not. Then shall they answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered, or athirst, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister unto thee? And then shall he answer them, saying, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye did it not to one of the least of these, ye did it not to me. And these shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into life eternal. Now, it certainly sounds like it's based on works, doesn't it? Jesus said, I was hungry and you fed me. I was sick and you visited me. You know, all these kind of things. It certainly sounds like that works will get you to heaven, doesn't it? But let's see what's going on here. There's three groups of people in this passage: sheep, goats, and in verse 40, he calls my brethren. Sheep, goats, and the brothers of Jesus. Okay? Now, let's mention some things here that may not be real obvious as you first look at this. First of all, when is this judgment going to take place? Notice verse 31. When the Son of Man shall come in his glory. Do you know what that's referring to? His second coming. Isn't that clear? When the Son of Man shall come in his glory and all the holy angels with him. Then, so you got a when and a then. Then, he says, shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. So the millennial kingdom will be set up right after the second coming of Christ. Now, we don't know if it'll be 1 day, 10 days, 30 days, but soon after Jesus comes. So he sets the second coming as the beginning of our study. When the Lord will come, he says, with all the holy angels with him. And then he says in verse 32, before him shall be gathered all nations. Now I want to interrupt my sermon with a special bulletin here. In that day, the people are going to be divided by nations. So I'm assuming there'll be a United States section that, and all that. But people are going to be judged as individuals. The Bible does not teach that people can go to heaven just because of other people in their nation. See, that would be like saying, where's the Mount Vernon church section at? And the Lord's going to let us into heaven because we're all, members of the same church. No, the nations will be there, but they'll be judged as individuals. All right? It's also called sometimes, and if you do some research, you'll find this out, this is referred to as the judgment of the Gentiles. And I'll be honest with you, I spent most of the day Saturday in panic mode trying to figure out how it's called the judgment of the Gentiles, but it actually is really simple. When he says in verse 32, and before him shall be gathered all nations. The word for nations in the Greek is the same word for Gentiles. So that's why it's called all the nations to be gathered. Because if it were just the Jews, they're all would be particularly related to the area of Palestine or Israel. So these are Gentiles, and that's real important in your understanding of it. Because the brothers in verse 40, when he says, my brethren, if you've done it unto one of the least of these, my brethren, you have done it unto me. They apparently are Jews. I said apparently. Now notice, read my lips. Watch this on TV when you get home. There's some of this we have to just feel like is implied, and it's not directly stated. So the sheep and the goats are Gentiles who have survived the tribulation. They're people now. They're not literal sheep and literal goats. They're people. And the brethren are Jews also in the tribulation. Now, in the tribulation, what does it take to survive? Well, you can't take the mark of the beast. So, if you can't take the mark of the beast, you cannot buy or sell. So a believer in Jesus Christ in the tribulation is going to be in for some hard times, right? He will not be able to go to Walmart. He can't buy. He can't sell. He can't go to the farmer's market and sell his produce. He is not going to have anybody to take care of him. He's going to need food, support, and hospitality. Watch this carefully now. Any Gentile in the tribulation who goes out of his way to assist a Jew when the Jew is under a death sentence is demonstrating by doing that his faith that he is a believer as well. Do y'all get that? It's sort of like between 1939 and 1945 when Hitler had the Jews in Germany under a death sentence. Anyone who dared to try to spare the Jews, remember Schindler or some of these that tried to spare the Jews, Corrie ten Boom, they were actually demonstrating their faith by assisting God's people in their time of distress. So helping somebody else will not save you, but in the tribulation, there'll be no one the Jew can turn to. And so anyone who goes out of his way to assist the Jew is demonstrating by that he himself is a believer. That's why Jesus said, if you've done it unto one of the least of these, you've done it unto me. See, all of us say we love Jesus, right? The truth is that probably none of us have seen Jesus today in a physical body. How do you demonstrate your love for Jesus? By loving other people who love Jesus, right? Loving his people. See, it's hard to convince me that you're a Christian if you hate other Christians, or if you hate people because of the color of their skin, or because they're Jewish or whatever. The way we can demonstrate our love for Jesus is to love his people. And a church, that should be the number one characteristic of any church, is that you love the people who come here. Now, it doesn't mean we have to all see everything just alike. You don't have to all vote for the same candidate. But we should still love one another. That's the way we can tell. How can you love Jesus whom you've never seen if you don't love people who claim to love him that you see every day? And you all know that one of the problems we have in churches is we get to know people too well, I guess, and their faults and failures begin to pop up instead of the good things. And so we tend after a while to become where we don't want to be around certain people. That's where cliques develop. We just have people who believe the same thing as we do, and we just want to be with them, and we ignore other people in the church. So have I made this clear, or have y'all just muddied up the water for you? These people, the sheep that Jesus is going to allow in, are not going to be in because of their works, but because they have demonstrated that in a time when everybody was against the Jews, they tried to help them. And because they did it unto one of the least of the brethren of Jesus, they're doing it unto him. Now, the goats, on the other hand, are people who had paid no attention to the Jews and their suffering, and had no concern for them, and by that lack of concern and interest demonstrated that they were not true believers. That's why Jesus sentenced them to judgment. Notice this, if you will, in verse 34. Then shall the king, now who is the king, class? Jesus. All right. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Notice carefully now that this kingdom was prepared for them from the foundation of the world. But when you read verse 41, then shall he say unto them on the left hand, Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire. Notice and of course that everlasting fire is obviously a picture of hell, that he doesn't say that it was prepared for them. See, there's some people who believe that we're predestined to be saved or lost. In other words, we can't help it. If I'm predestined to be saved, I'm going to be saved anyway, regardless of what I do. And if I'm predestined to be lost, then I can't be saved even if I tried. But he doesn't say here, the kingdom has been prepared for the sheep, but hell has been prepared for the goats. Who was hell prepared for, class? You've got it right there in front of you. For the devil and his angels. Remember, we talked about that last night. His angels would have been those that followed him in his rebellion against God. We would call them demons. Okay, hell has been prepared for the devil. So why do people go there? They go as a usurper, just like Satan's out of place running this earth. People are out of place in hell. God never made you to go to hell. He wanted you to go to heaven. Okay? Now here's something else. Now you might want to fasten your seatbelt now, because this is going to be a disturb you a little bit. When Jesus says in verse 34, inherit the kingdom prepared for you, when you think in your mind of kingdom, you think of heaven. He's not talking about heaven. He's talking about the millennial kingdom. He's going to let them, these are the people who will be allowed into his kingdom. All right, now watch carefully. The bottom line is all of them were believers. Okay? There won't be any unbelievers who enter the millennial kingdom. Now, it will not be that way at the end, so just be aware at the beginning, everybody will have to be saved to get in. But the kingdom here, he's talking about the millennial kingdom, because he's going to talk here about the 1,000-year rule that we'll look at in just a minute. Be aware of this, dear, that you would have to be a believer to enter into Jesus' kingdom. Here's a quote from the Lord's Prayer, which is actually the model prayer, but you'll call it the Lord's Prayer after I'm gone, so it's okay. Matthew 6:10. Listen to this, see if you recognize it. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. What's the next words? On earth as it is in heaven. Now we know God's will is being done in heaven, right, class? But is God's will being done on earth right now? No, it is not God's will for people to get on television and call each other liars and thieves and crooks and all that. Sort of reminds me of the court case one time where these two lawyers didn't like each other, and one of them stood up and called the other lawyer a liar, and the second lawyer got up and called the first one a thief, and the judge took his gavel and rapped on he said, now that the two lawyers have identified themselves, can we proceed with this case? Ansley, you get that one, but some of it still hasn't got to the back yet. So there should be a roar of laughter in about 5 minutes. I'm going to check my watch just to make sure. Okay, at 7:09, that joke should have circulated through the whole building. But when the Lord's will is done on earth as it is in heaven, it will be in the millennial kingdom. It won't be when the Democrats take over or the Republicans take over the White House, but it'll be when Jesus comes back and sets up his kingdom. And that, by the way, dear, is when we're going to have peace in this world. Not until then. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't work for peace and pray for peace and strive for it, but it ain't going to happen with man setting it up. It only will happen when Jesus comes back, when he sets up his kingdom. So just be aware now that the kingdom in verse 34 is the millennial 1,000-year rule, and the sheep will be able to go in. Now, Jesus says the goats, he talks about them, separating them in verses 41 to 46. You'll notice that both the sheep and the goats were surprised. In other words, the sheep said, Lord, we don't even remember doing all this stuff to you. And Jesus said, well, you didn't really do it to me, but you did it to my brethren, and it's the same as doing it to me. Remember, he said one time, if you give just a cup of cold water in his name, you'll be rewarded for it, in his name. But the goats, they said, we don't remember seeing you and not ministering to you. And Jesus said, oh, you had people all around you that you could have ministered to, but you weren't interested in them. And by not being interested in them, you proved that you were not interested in me. So, who are these brethren, though, in verse 40? Jesus talked about the sheep and the goats. Who are his brethren? Now, I'll be honest, we don't have a clear answer to that. There's not a specific verse in the Bible that tells us who they are. So I will tell you, based on the research that I have done for this study, what most Bible scholars believe. I'm not saying you have to believe it, but this is what most of them believe, and it probably is a reasonable answer. Most Bible interpreters believe that the brethren of verse 40 here are, and of course they're fellow Jews because Jesus calls them his brethren. But we believe now that they're the 144,000 of Revelation chapter 7 that were sealed and sent out to be his witnesses in the tribulation period. All right. Have you ever heard of anybody else that claims to be witnesses for Jehovah? Yeah, they're here. Do you know what they call their building? They don't call it a church. Kingdom Hall. Because they claim they're, spreading the word. But what they don't realize is we're not in the kingdom yet. We're still on earth in a sinful world with Satan pulling the strings. But the kingdom is going to come. But it's not yet. And sometimes we pray, I think, without thinking, Lord, thank you that so-and-so was saved this morning and entered the kingdom. Well, I don't know what the Lord thinks about that prayer, but we haven't entered the kingdom yet. It's going to be set up after the tribulation. So, the 144,000, let's go back to them for a minute. Could they be the brethren he's talking about here? Yes, they could be. I'm not saying definitely, but I'm just saying I lean towards that because people who are a lot smarter than me have studied this, and that's their conclusion. Their job was to go out and witness throughout in the tribulation period. See, God is always going to have a witness. Have you heard preachers say that? That's true. God will always have a witness. There will never be a time when there's zero Christians in the world. It may seem like everybody's gone crazy and everybody's wicked, but there's always going to be a believer somewhere. And in the tribulation, even in that horrible time that Jesus called the worst time that has ever been, there will be 144,000 out preaching during that time. Now, will they have any success? What do y'all think? Yes. Yes. How do I know that? Revelation chapter 7, the same chapter that talks about the 144,000. In the first 8 verses, it talks about the 144,000. But then in verse 9 of Revelation chapter 7, it says that he saw a great multitude of people of all kindreds and tongues and nations in heaven. And these were people who come out of great tribulation. There will be people saved in the tribulation. I have never doubted that, but I have said it won't be us. It won't be people that come to Mount Vernon every Sunday and hear a gospel message, and you sit here and decide you're going to wait and put it off. You will not be saved then, but other people will, who probably have never been confronted with the gospel, and somebody sit down and explain to them what they have to do to go to heaven. But in the 144,000, according to Revelation chapter 7 and verse 3, they will be sealed by the Lord. They will have a seal upon them. In the Old Testament, there was a seal put on people for ownership and protection. Now, y'all have watched enough Westerns to know what a seal is for, hadn't you? You've seen cattle branded on Bonanza and on these Westerns we grew up watching. They'd always want to, bad guys in the Old West were folks who stole your cattle and changed the brand, remember? They were the bad guys, the cattle thieves, the rustlers. But for ownership and protection, so God's going to protect these 144,000. And by the way, now this is just an idea, but I'll throw it out to you just for you to think about. It could be that the 144,000 will be saved in a similar way to the Apostle Paul. Remember, Paul's conversion was not like ours. I doubt if you were saved exactly like Paul. He was struck down. He saw a bright light. He was blinded for 3 days, remember. He heard a voice speak to him out of heaven. I didn't have any of that when I went down the aisle, Paul, at Consolation Baptist Church. I didn't hear a voice out of heaven, and I didn't see a bright light, and I wasn't blinded for 3 days. I was dumb for several months after that, but that was because of what happened before then. It goes back to my IQ. It wasn't based on whether or not I was saved. But Paul himself, this is the most interesting verse, 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 8. Paul says that he himself was one converted out of due season. I believe is the way the King James puts it. He was converted out of due time. Or he said, I was born out of due time. I used to read that, and I thought he meant he was born too late. He couldn't be one of the 12 disciples. He was born later. But no, what he meant was he was born too early. He was born thousands of years before the 144,000 would be sent out. But it could very well be that they'll be converted in the same way that Paul was. They'll have such a supernatural conversion, and they'll be out witnessing. Now, God's original plan was for the nation of Israel to be his witnesses. But did they? No, they failed. They became, instead of converting other nations to their God, they became influenced by these other peoples and began to worship idols and stuff that other peoples did. And they were so far off base that they didn't even recognize the Messiah when he appeared. So Israel let him down, but the 144,000 will be doing the job that God originally intended for Israel to do. But anyway, I've sort of went around the world there as usual to give you a simple answer. I believe the brethren in verse 40 could be the 144,000. They probably are, that will be converted and will be out preaching during the tribulation times. So these people will have shown mercy to the 144,000 and fed them and been hospitable toward them and all of that. And because of that, the Lord says, you must have accepted my message, therefore you can enter my kingdom. Now, just want to point this out, and then we'll move on from the judgment of the sheep and the goats. Notice this last verse, verse 46. And Jesus said, and these shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into life eternal. Okay? It's on the screen. Watch it now, because I'm going somewhere. Have you ever had people to doubt, or maybe you've doubted, or maybe you've heard somebody doubt that hell will be forever, and they have maybe suggested that maybe somehow God will let those people out after a period of suffering and he'll just turn them loose? Listen, I wish I could believe that, and there are people who teach that, but, and by the way, the witnesses for Jehovah that I was talking about earlier, they believe in what's called the annihilation of the soul, that the soul will just burn up. Like if I took a match and lit this piece of paper here, it would begin to catch fire and burn up, and there'd be nothing left but ashes. I wish I could believe that. That would mean that the people who went to hell would suffer for a while, but when they burn up, that'd be the end of it, and it'd be over. But here's something I need you to be aware of. It's the most interesting verse. What kind of punishment did he say that goats would have? Everlasting. What kind of life did he say the sheep would have? Eternal. In the Greek, it's the same word. So watch this now. We can't bake our cake and eat it too. If hell is not forever, then neither is heaven, because it's the same word. See, you can't get around this. I had a Facebook friend write me what is that called? Send you a text. Is that it? See, I don't know anything. I just hang around Facebook to get all the news, because I know if I see it on Facebook, it's got to be true. But and then I check the banner to double check it. That's a double check. Especially section 2A of the banner, or 2B rather. 2B or not to be. Nevertheless, y'all didn't know I knew Shakespeare, did you? Nevertheless, this lady wrote to me and said, is there any place in the Bible that just plainly says that hell will last forever? And this is the verse I sent back to her, Matthew 25:46. Everlasting punishment. That's forever, isn't it? I probably could have found some other verses, but that one just popped in my mind. Now, here's the deal, dear. The judgment of the sheep and goats, when you hear some preacher using that as a pretext to how people go to heaven, you can just write it down that preacher's either ignorant or a false prophet. It could just be ignorant. Because, I didn't know what the judgment of the sheep and goats really meant until I began to study it. And so it could be that maybe it's been enlightening to you. I don't know. But anyway, let's go to the second point on our outline. Do you know who the sheep are? They were the ones who will go out of their way to assist God's people in the dark time of the tribulation. The goats will be those who had no time for God's people, who ignored them, and who by that lifestyle indicated they were not interested in spiritual things. Now let's go to the second point on our outline, scriptures relating to the millennial kingdom. Now, the very first thing I said last night, besides what a birdie apple this is, the next thing I said last night was there's more information on the millennium than we're going to have time to study. Remember, I said you won't be ready to go on Fox and Friends and discuss the millennium yet. I hope you'll have a better understanding of it, but there's verses all over the Bible about the millennial kingdom. But there's a couple here that I wanted to point out that are very important. One of them is Matthew chapter 19, verses 27 to 29. There's one word in this passage now that just really excites me. I get stirred up about it. This will cause a Baptist to get excited. Look at this, Matthew 19:27. Peter asked the Lord, he says, no, I'm on Matthew 25. No wonder that didn't look right. I was still at the sheep and the goats. Matthew 19:27. It helps when you get the right scripture. Then answered Peter and said unto him, talking to Jesus now, behold, we have forsaken all and followed thee. And by the way, none of us have done that. Y'all haven't quit your job and just gone into full-time preaching. You come to church and we appreciate that, and you committed, that's good. But Peter and the other disciples had left their way of life. They were fishermen, and some of them were other things, but Peter was a fisherman. He said, we have forsaken all and followed thee. What shall we have, therefore? Now, in a way, that's a good question, but in a way it's not, because Peter's got a bad attitude here. He's like saying, Lord, what am I going to get out of this? Don't ever come to church to think what you're going to get out of it. Always come thinking what you can put into it, what you can give, how you can help others. Now, here's something that I've heard over and over. It just really irritates me. This is one of my pet peeves. I run into people that have changed churches, and it's okay to change churches. Some of y'all have, and that's okay. But when somebody says, the reason I left my original church was because I wasn't getting anything out of the sermons. Listen, dear, you're coming for the wrong reason. If you come to get something out of the sermon, and what if you don't get it? You should come for what you can give, what you want to do to be a blessing to other people. Y'all might say, well, I hadn't done anything for you, Brother Robert. Oh, yes, just being here is an encouragement to me. When I know y'all could be home, and you could easily be home. Out of all the 40 years that I've been here, this one would be the easiest one to skip, because the COVID fear. Many people are afraid to come to church, and they really are. I mean, I don't judge those people and say, well, you know, they ought to have more faith. I know God can take care of us, don't y'all? But he also doesn't want us to tempt him. And the reason I left Jeff Davis Hospital, I've got a witness here tonight. I love the hospital. I didn't want to go. I've tried to get back in since they let me out, and they won't let me in because they fed me 3 warm meals every day, delicious meals. They cleaned up behind me when I didn't make up my bed. They came and made it up. I had it made at the hospital. I didn't want to leave, but the COVID unit was taking over the floor. And I felt like if I didn't get out, I would be tempting God to say, well, you know, I know he's able to take care of me, so I'm going to stay here in this room. I don't care if everybody else around me is coughing and got the COVID and all that. God expects us to use common sense. But you coming has been an encouragement to me. Brother Darrell and I both knew, and we mentioned this on the phone the other day when I called him. He said, Brother Robert, there probably won't be that many that'll come. We had a wonderful crowd last night. I would think there were close to 100 people here last night. I don't know about y'all. I didn't count them now. I don't ever count the congregation. But we had a beautiful crowd. And this is a good crowd for Monday night. I mean, we have to remember this is Monday night. This is, we have to compete with Monday Night Football, I guess. I don't know if that's still on or not. But anyway, I'm glad you're here. Come, though, with the idea, I'm going to pray for Brother Robert. You don't have to bring me money. Just pray for me. Pray for me. Pray that God will give me strength and help me to remember these scriptures and stuff. But Peter said, what are we going to get out of this? We have followed you. We have given up everything. What are we going to get? And the Lord said, verily I say unto you, that ye which have followed me in the regeneration, when the Son of Man shall sit in the throne of his glory, ye shall also sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, why do y'all think there were 12 thrones? Why do you think Jesus used that number? One for each of the disciples, see, the 12. Now, I know Judas won't have one. It could be that Paul will have that 12th one. We don't know now. I can't answer that. I don't know. But notice verse 29. And every one that hath forsaken houses, or brethren, or sisters, or father, or mother, or wife, or children, or lands, for my name's sake, shall receive 100-fold, and shall inherit everlasting life. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's nice, but what does that have to do with the millennium? Oh, I'm glad you asked. There's one word in that passage that just jumps out. It's my favorite word of the week. I mean, this really gets me excited. Be still, my heart. I'm all excited now. It's the word regeneration in verse 28. I wonder if you know what that word means. When Jesus said, when the Son of Man shall sit on the throne of his glory. Now, didn't he say that in Matthew 25:31? When the Son of Man shall come and with the holy angels, and he'll sit on the throne of his... That's an earthly throne. That's not talking about his throne in heaven. So Jesus said, when the Son of Man shall sit on the throne of his glory, when you have followed me in the regeneration. All right, now watch carefully. The word regeneration in the Greek, I not only read this, but I looked it up in my concordance just to make sure that I wasn't, I don't want to ever teach y'all something that isn't right. I don't know everything, but I'm not going to deliberately teach you something that isn't right. The word regeneration, listen to what the Greek word is for it. Palingenesis. If you take the re off of it and you just have generation, do you see the word Genesis there almost? Does it remind you of the word Genesis? It's a regenesis. In the Greek, it is palingenesis. Now, that's not spelled pollen like P-O-L-L-E-N. It's spelled P-A-L-I-N. I guess if Sarah was here, she'd call it palin, wouldn't she? But it's palingenesis. It means Genesis again, or a regenesis. That thrills me. In other words, the millennial kingdom will be like it was before man fell. Remember last night, the first thing I mentioned to y'all is the most wonderful time since the fall of man is yet to come. It'll be Genesis all over again. Now, I don't know if y'all have ever done this. I know I do some stupid things, and I have done. But I used to wonder, I wish that I could see this earth before man messed it up. I remember the last time we went to the Smoky Mountains on vacation. It's been several years now. But the last thing I remember about the Smoky Mountains is the sound of chainsaws. They were cutting down trees to make more, apartments for people to rent, more cabins, cottages, whatever you want to call them. In other words, man, in a period of time, it'll soon be the Smoky Forest because the mountains, all the trees will be gone, and it'll be the land will be denuded. I see log trucks going through Hazelhurst every day, and I'm not saying it's a sin to cut pulpwood. I didn't say that. But I'm just saying man will destroy the beauty of nature. Look at what's going to happen to Hawaii in a few years. It's called paradise now. It won't be that way for long, not when man gets through with it. Anything man gets hold of, he ruins it. The state of Florida, when I was a little boy, my uncle used to go to Florida every now and then. I thought that was the most beautiful place I'd ever seen in my life. Now it's interstates, toll roads, and all that, and if the only progress you see is another interstate being put in. I used to go to Orlando, Florida. I couldn't drive in Orlando now. I can't even drive in Baxley. But and they removed the barrels, didn't they, Ansley? We had the barrels for about 20 of the 40 years I've been coming here. We thought the barrels would be here when Jesus came, but they finally moved them somewhere. But nevertheless, you'd have to be an old timer to get that joke. Me and Ansley are dating ourselves here by laughing at the barrels. They used to have them down there where you turn on Highway 15, and they were there long after they'd finished working on that intersection. But nevertheless, I've often wondered how beautiful this earth would be, and the earth is still beautiful. There are places you can go that are beautiful. I don't know for sure, but I've seen it on television. I watch the Weather Channel until they start showing reruns, and then I turn that off. And that sounds like a joke, but they really do. They have reruns. They'll have the same thing over and over. You watch it in the morning, and they'll watch it again that evening. You'll see the same videos that people have sent in on those earth cams and all. But one day I'm going to get to see it. Because, see, me and you are going to be in that millennial kingdom as well. If you love Jesus and giving your heart to Jesus, you might say, well, I didn't see that in the Bible. How do you know that we're going to be there? Well, I'll just tell you, in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, which is the passage on the rapture of the church, it says that we'll meet the Lord in the air. And then it says, so shall we ever be with the Lord. That means wherever the Lord goes, we're going to go. So when Jesus gets ready to go set up his kingdom, we're going to go with him, see? And it's 2 Thessalonians 2 and 12. That's 2 Thessalonians 2 and 12. Paul says, if we suffer with him, we will reign with him. Well, when are we going to reign with him? During his kingdom. He will be the ruler, but we're going to have secondary jobs. Well, in other words, we'll have a job in Jesus' administration. I ought not to tell you all this, but since I've got 30 seconds left, I'm going to tell you. Joe Biden is getting up his administration now, the people who will be secretary of this and secretary of that and all that kind of stuff. We call it the swamp. That's our name for it. Did you know that in the Millennial Kingdom, Jesus will be the ruler? And we'll talk more about this tomorrow night, probably. But we're going to have Paul says in 1 Corinthians, chapter 6 and verse 2, Paul says, know ye not that the saints are going to judge the world? What does he mean? When are we going to judge the world? Well, it'll be in the Millennial Kingdom. We'll help Jesus. Now, I don't expect to have a cabinet level job in Jesus' administration, but I do want to have something to do. Don't you? Don't you want to have something in that 1,000 years that you can help the Lord run this earth as the way it should be run? Yes. So we will be in that kingdom as well. But I'll get to see the earth as it was because it's going to be regenicized. That's probably not even a word. But in the regeneration. And this word, I think, is only used here in the New Testament. It may be somewhere else, but I know it's only used a time or two in the Bible. But it means Genesis again. If you're not careful, say you just read that word and not know what it means and just say, well, that's one of those big words. I don't know what it means. It means Genesis again. So Jesus says, those of you that have followed me, are you one of his followers? Those of you that have followed me, when Genesis again is made over, when it's made over, when the Son of Man shall sit in the throne of his glory, you are also going to sit upon. Now he was talking there to one of the 12 disciples. Me and you will not have one of those 12 thrones, but it'll be 12 thrones. They'll be judging the people of Israel. It's outside of our study for tonight, but King David is apparently going to be resurrected and brought back. He'll be the vice ruler of the world. Jesus will be the ruler. Now, I don't know what title he'll have, if he'll call himself president, prime minister, or what, but King David will be over Israel, but Jesus will be over the whole earth. And I'll show you that probably tomorrow night. Now, in Revelation chapter 20, there's some more information about the millennial kingdom. It'd be a pity to leave tonight and not read Revelation chapter 20, wouldn't it? When it's only 7 verses. I mean, where else can y'all have as much fun as we're having here? Just waiting on my next verbal goof up. Revelation chapter 20. It might help if I knew it was the last book of the Bible. When I get to the concordance here, I've gone too far. So I'm now making a left turn to go back to Revelation chapter 20. All right, look at this, verses 1 to 7. And this is probably the clearest teaching about the millennium that you'll find in the Bible. In other words, the whole 7 verses. And I saw an angel come down from heaven having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. Who do y'all think that angel is? Most likely it's Jesus, isn't it? All right, and he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years. You know why we're going to have such a good time on planet Earth? Because the devil's going to be incarcerated for 1,000 years. Okay, you'll notice there he's got 4 names. He's a con artist. He operates under different names. Identity theft. He is not only Satan, which means adversary, but he is the dragon, that old serpent. And in the Greek, it reads something like this, that serpent of old. Now, I'm going to throw this in as a little tidbit for you. This don't cost y'all any extra because we're in overtime now. This don't cost y'all any more. How do we know that the serpent in the Garden of Eden was the devil? I don't think it really says it there. It just talks about a serpent tempting Eve and talking to Eve. How do you know that serpent was the devil besides the preachers tell you it is? Well, right here. It says that old serpent. So this is how we prove that it was the devil in the Garden of Eden that was dealing with Eve. See, y'all probably never have worried about that, but I never had either until I heard a preacher talking about it the other day, and I thought, well, that's something to think about, because it doesn't really say in Genesis that it was the devil. It just says it was a serpent. But here it does, which is the devil. I believe that's the word diablos. And Satan, and bound him 1,000 years. He'll be locked up for 1,000 years. That's why there'll be no wars during that 1,000-year millennial kingdom. Do you know if the devil got himself arrested and locked up now, we'd have peace on earth? People would start getting along if the devil would get out of the way. He's the one who keeps things stirred up at churches. When you hear about a church having a split, you'll know the devil's been in the midst of that. It isn't God. God doesn't lead people to get mad with each other and quit speaking to each other and leave, and say bad things about one another. That's Satan that does that. And I'll just go ahead and give you all my opinion of church splits since you did not ask. I'll just tell you this, because I was in one in 1974. When you have a church, or 73 I believe it was now, when you have a church split, everybody usually is wrong. We usually think, there's a right side, and then we got the bad guys. The bad guys leave and go down the road and start another church. Well, if all the right people stayed, why is it that in a few months there's another split at the same church? There wasn't nothing but good people left, right? All the bad ones went down the road and started another church. If you'll read, and I love Appling County, this is my home county, but we have too many churches here. There's too many churches in Appling County, and almost all of them started by a split. It's one thing if people say, well, we need a church in this part of the county that's not one, within 15 to 20 miles, and they go over and start a church. That's great. But if you just get mad and leave and go down the road and start another church, then that's not always good, because everybody knows why you did it. They know that you didn't get along at this last church, and now there's a fuss, and it sort of gives the church a black eye. Well, anyway, I wish y'all wouldn't let me get off the subject. No wonder it's taking me till 7:30 to finish. Verse 3, and cast him into the bottomless pit. Now that is not hell. You would think it is, but it's not. It's the abyss. And shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more. Now you remember at Easter when Jesus was put in the tomb, they put a seal on his grave, remember? But that didn't do no good. He came forth in 3 days. But this seal is going to hold the devil, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. And after that, he must be loosed a little season. And that'll come up, I think, about the first thing tomorrow night, about the loosing of Satan. Because, if you have never studied this before, you wonder, why would God turn him out after 1,000 years? Maybe that's where people get the idea that they'll be turned out of hell. The bottomless pit means a place with no foundation. We don't know exactly where it is. I think it's in the center of the earth, although I can't prove that, but I think that. But it's called the abyss, A-B-Y-S-S. In the Old Testament, it's called the deep. It's a place of incarceration for the most wicked of the creatures. And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. So this is verse 4. This is apparently some of the judgment here of the millennial kingdom. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus. And these are people that were put to death, of course, during the tribulation time. They're called tribulation saints. They chose to die rather than take the mark of the beast. And says they were beheaded for the witness of Jesus and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. So they're called the tribulation saints. They will be with the Lord. They'll be raised or resurrected, and they'll have 1,000 years with him in the millennial kingdom. But the rest of the dead, that is, the others who died in the tribulation, lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Now that is, the way that is put, it's a little confusing to me. But the first resurrection will be the saints, the ones who didn't take the mark of the beast. He said, blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death hath no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. Okay, here's our last verse. And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison. Okay, now we'll talk about that tomorrow night, why he'll be loosed. But did you notice in verses 2 through 7, in every verse, the number 1,000 shows up? So how long do you think the millennial kingdom will last? The word millennium itself means thousand. It comes from two Latin words, mille, which means thousand, and annum, which means year. Millennium is 1,000 years. So tomorrow night, now I said this last night, but we bypassed it tonight. But now this time I'm really serious. Y'all gonna need a Bible tomorrow night or you're gonna be eating off the floor in here. Because if you'll notice in Roman numeral 4, just about everything in there is scripture. So we will need to turn to these passages and read them. It's not going to be enough just to tell y'all. I could tell y'all probably in 15 minutes the 5 things tomorrow night. But you need to see it. And they'll give you a little extra understanding of what's going to happen. I've just called it the major events of the millennium. Now, so far we've talked about why is the millennium needed. Had those last night. And then tonight we talked about how it's going to be, who will be allowed to enter, only the righteous. Now, if only the righteous can enter the kingdom and Jesus will be the ruler and he's going to have us help him rule, what kind of people are going to be helping him? The righteous. Now, here's a profound statement with tomorrow being election day, which nobody cares anymore because by now there should be enough fraud in the state of Georgia to handle that election. But anyway, did you know that in Jesus' government in the millennium there'll be no crooked politicians and there'll be nobody that can be bribed because all the ones that enter his government will be the righteous? What if Joe Biden made a statement tomorrow and said, don't even apply to be in my government unless you're a born-again Christian? We wouldn't have a government. But this will be a time when politicians will be honest and cannot be bribed. Will be in the millennial kingdom. That's just a little tidbit now that you got by being here tonight. I'm not sure that Facebook will let that go across. The fact checkers might throw that one out. But nevertheless, don't y'all love the fact checkers? I like what somebody put the other day. I put this on my homepage, but I don't know if you can get it or not because I don't have enough sense to tell you how to do it. But somebody they found the book to check, a fact-checking book, and it had a picture of the Holy Bible. This is the fact checker right here. Not what Facebook says, but what God's Word says. This is the truth. All right, now tomorrow night, Lord willing, tomorrow night. I said Lord willing now because all of us could be quarantined somewhere. But if we're not, tomorrow night, we'll talk about 5 specific things that will happen in the millennial kingdom. And when I first started thinking about studying this last year, this is what I thought about was number 4 on the outline, Roman numeral 4, about all this stuff, about how the earth's going to be remade and all that. I didn't realize there was so much else to it, but I'm glad we got to talk about it tonight. So if you will, stand with us. We'll be dismissed with a word of prayer. Hope you have a blessed evening. Now, one thing we can say this week so far, and if we can believe the Weather Channel, remember in our studies in the past, we'd have one night it'd be freezing cold, and the next night we'd all be in short sleeves, and we never did know whether to call it the January Bible study, the winter Bible study, or multi-season Bible study. The temperature is supposed to be pretty much the same all 4 of these nights if the Weather Channel has got it right, which will also be the first time this year that they've got it right. If y'all don't believe it, you can watch the reruns tonight on the Weather Channel. You might think, oh, look here, it's snowing in New York. No, dear, it was snowing in New York yesterday. They just now put it on the Weather Nation or whatever. But anyway, I'm just going to take my apple and leave town and not even leave a forwarding address. But if y'all didn't like anything I said tonight, you can call Brother Darrell after church and tell him to get back tomorrow night. But anyway, I'm going to walk by his chair. Now, it's going to be hard not to sit in it, but this is mind over matter. I'm going to mentally toughen myself to walk by his chair without sitting in it. But we do miss Brother Darrell, and y'all are so blessed. And I say this when there's nobody around or when we're here at church. Y'all are blessed to have a pastor for all the, and I think it is 36 years. I believe he had it right last night. We were all calling out different numbers. But anyway, isn't that strange that he would know since it's his time here? But what a blessing. How many churches do you know have been as blessed as y'all are? So thank the Lord for that. Now my eyes are beginning to burn. I've been having a lot of problem in the past few months with what they call dry eyes. I have dry eyes, dry mouth, and a dry sense of humor. But ladies, I'm not going to be winking at you when you leave tonight, but one of the eyes is worse than the other. Remember, we'll have to socially distance. So while I can still see how to get down now, I'm going to leave. But Brother Jonathan, would you call on somebody to lead us in prayer or either lead us yourself?